everybody. Welcome to the Coach's Journey podcast. Robbie here, and the guest in this episode is Myles Downey. So if you haven't listened to the previous episode with Myles or don't know who he is, Myles is a writer, speaker, and consultant whose work focuses on performance, potential, and leadership. And his core skill is coaching, a discipline he has been practicing for more than 40 years. He's regarded as one of the most foremost leader performance coaches. He's coached senior executives and leadership teams in some of the most prestigious organizations across the globe in most market sectors, helping them deliver significant business results. And he was the founder of the School of Coaching in 1996, which was the first institution in Europe to focus solely on the development of coaching skills for coaches, managers, and leaders. He's also the author of a number of books, including Effective Modern Coaching, which was an important book in my development as a coach, and for which a new edition has just come out. And it was also an important book for you, right, Neil?
Yes, absolutely. Although I read a much earlier version, which was only called Effective Coaching, but huge in my development.
And you only discovered that when we were prepping for this podcast, that there was another edition in between, right?
Yeah, literally. Because one of my bugbears with books is when people write or release new editions and there is nothing changed. And what I can confidently say, having got the fear when I returned to prep a few days in advance of the interview and compared side by side Myles's new edition to 2 editions ago, the differences are substantial and involved me really getting to grips with the new book and exploring and discovering all the new things that it contains.
And we should probably say something about the fact that we're both here.
Yeah. Yeah. So part of the joy of being members of a host team, which I guess you are too, Robbie, albeit that you flew solo for tens of episodes in advance of us coming on board, is we get to play with different formats and see what it's like having a 3-way conversation with one of our guests. And Robbie very kindly invited me to join he and Myles on this recording. Robbie and Myles did an earlier episode together, and it was an opportunity for us to play with the format and see what came up, really. And so I guess I wonder, like, what came up for you? How did the experiment go?
Yeah, it was a great experiment, and I think we should do it again. I think it's fun to play with the format. It's one of the real advantages that comes from it trying to innovate in the podcasting space. We stumbled over each other, just like I'm stumbling over my words now. We stumbled over each other a little, didn't we, in the episode? We've left some of that in where it's funny or nice, and taken some of it out where, which is what we often do in the editing, where if it gets in the way of listening, we've kind of taken it out. But mostly, I got the same feeling I got. I think I said this to you immediately after we spoke to Myles. I got the same feeling I got when I listened to your interview with Julie Starr, which is the first interview on the show that I wasn't the host of, which was like, oh, it's so great that Neil is here because he's asking things that I wouldn't ask. And we're going to get to in a sec some of the things that stood out for us listening back. But one of them is I loved you. I think you took us more than I did last time into Myles's thoughts on building coaching businesses, which I'm so glad that we did. I don't think I would have done that this time if you hadn't been there. And that's just one of many examples. I also loved it that you pulled out and read to him 2 paragraphs from the book, which I had highlighted to pull out and read to him. So it was also a good sign that we were on the same page in the right places. I think it'd be great. What we're going to do now is have just a brief discussion about other bits that stood out for us. Before I do that, it's worth saying, if you want to hear loads more about Myles's journey as a listener, you can go back and listen to the earlier episode with him. I got it up. Let me just check which one it is. It's episode 31. But the nice thing about one of the things that I noticed as I was listening back is we touch in on some of the same ideas that Myles and I covered last time, and in a really core ideas way. So Myles thinks about coaching with a real clarity that I find, very useful in my practice as a coach. And we cover those core ideas here as well. So you definitely don't have to go back and listen to episode 31. There's loads in here to take away. And yeah, before we dive into the show, let's hear, Neil, what stood out for you, or what did you notice?
I think the first thing to say is right from the get-go, Myles gets stuck in. He has some views, and they are born of a depth of experience and thought in the coaching space. And it's undeniable that he is very generous in sharing them. So the first line that I pulled out, or area that really jumped out at me, was pushing back against the culture contagion of compliance. He has this way of capturing um, substantial things in the world of work and the world of executive coaching, and he makes no apologies for being very much focused on executive coaching and coaching for performance in the workplace. And yet, alongside, the capacity coaching has to ask powerful questions and get people to consider what the cost of compliance might be. And so that was an area that really spoke to me when I was listening back to it.
Yeah, it is interesting, like in this conversation, isn't it? We do two things at once, which is cool. And I mean, we didn't set out to do this, but there's a bunch of stuff about really practical core coaching. Like I love the bit where we talk about non-directive and directive coaching and why non-directive is more effective than directive, but also when being directive is important, which I think is a really important thing. So we get to like the nitty-gritty of coaching, and then we get to these like big sweeping kind of societal things or more societal things. That one you just talked about being really sweeping. There's this bit, the bit where we pulled out the same paragraphs has that amazing thing about self-actualization and performance, and also imagination, intuition, and creativity, and how to let those things loose. And they're about way, way more than the practice of coaching, but they are also about the practice of coaching. And so, that really all stood out for me. I also we had this really interesting conversation in the middle that I loved about why more senior leaders aren't getting more coaching. And I'm really glad Myles did a big part of that is just my you could kind of hear it in the conversation, my wishing that more senior leaders were hiring coaches because it'd make my business easier. And Myles does a great catch just after I think we do a really generous and nimble between the three of us kind of assessment of that situation. Then he does a great catch, which is none of us are the people leading big organizations. And so we really don't know. And it is guesswork. But I think I love that bit of the conversation.
Yeah. And I think he also, to some extent, and I point the finger largely at me here, he calls us to account in terms of, as coaches, and I'm certainly guilty of this, we might automatically believe that what these people need is coaching. And it is only one of the talk-based support available to people in those situations. And so coaching may not be the right thing. And he, again, asks a powerful question and is willing to interrogate things. It's funny, the piece you said around the performance coaching and self-actualization was another highlight for me from the conversation. And then he is careful in his language, and his way of unpacking constructs, construing, and maps of reality just opened up such depth for me on what can at times be criticized for being synthetic and lacking in depth as regards performance coaching. And I found his way of drawing a clear lineage way back from Assagioli and personal construct theory right the way up through all these different layers of rigorous research in how we as humans grow and learn was incredibly powerful, and both at times esoteric and intellectual, but still practically applicable as how we approach coaching as coaches, how we best support the clients that we're working with.
Yeah, so interesting. And I'm a big fan of listening to podcasts at 1.5 speed. I love doing that when I'm listening. That bit where he talks about constructing and construing, you're going to need to, listeners, you're going to need to slow down to normal speed for that bit, because we do. I mean, he does it fast in the book, actually. He does it in a couple of short chapters, but we do it really fast in this conversation. So it's permission to slow down your listening at that point. An idea that we talked about last time Myles was on the show, but since talking to him about it again when we recorded this interview, has been just everywhere for me, is the transcend and include idea. It's just, and you pull out a really nice point basically in the interview where you seem to me to be just saying it's kind of everything. That idea, it's kind of like everything we do in coaching, but invite him to again kind of define and dig into it. But I just, since that conversation, and I've known about that idea for a long time because it comes originally from a philosopher, Ken Wilber, who my dad was super into 25 years ago or something, and not quite that long, but 20 years ago. And but it's I just see it everywhere since we had that conversation, because it's it can be so useful.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. And there's a lot more in there too. And of course, it's in very much in alignment with and further exploration of the book, the latest edition of the book, which I think we both had similar experiences, a sort of intention to revisit the new bits and or rather check out the new bits and accept that we'd read a bunch, and then getting drawn back into this world, this compelling world of an executive coach who has been operating at the top of his game for decades in the space. And again, back to this piece around a depth of practical application of the practice of coaching that has led to him distilling that wisdom and being willing to generously share it both in the book and in the conversation with us.
Yeah. Yeah. Such a good point. And those core ideas about what is effective coaching, I think he's crystallized them more in this new book, but it's still exactly like you say, I got sucked into the like beautifully clean way that he brings these fundamentals to life in that book. I think we should probably get on with the interview because it's as much as we're having a great time. Like the piece, I guess one of the new pieces that I loved, and I speak to this a little bit, and we get into this great conversation at the end that I would encourage people to listen to or skip forward to if you're going to stop listening, is this piece about genius as a coach and the ideas about genius that Myles has generally, which is from his the book, kind of not the most recent one, but the one before that, I think, or 3 books ago, Enabling Genius, and this really nice thing. That it helped me see about how we can think about our genius as a seller of coaching as well as of coaching. Anything else that you wanted to pull out before we dive in?
No, I just sincerely hope that the listeners enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation. And I've had the opportunity in preparation for us creating this intro, which of course we do sometime after the recording of listening back to it. I'll be honest, a couple of times. I didn't do 1.5 speed. My brain can't work that fast. I think I'm a bit older than you. So, and it is like, he is a man with a lot to say, and much of it is worth paying attention to. So, a sincere hope that people get good stuff from it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Listen, enjoy it, listeners. Like one of the things I kind of hint at in this episode, but didn't say, is that since that last episode, Myles has actually been my coach for quite a period of time since the last time we spoke. And, it's been so valuable to me to get to be in his presence as a coach and kind of feel the impact of the decades of experience that we talk about. And, I think I'll be feeling the impact of that coaching for many years for sure. But generally, like I say at the start, and which you're going to hear it in a sec again, but it's like the energy that I sometimes get from Myles in full flow and that clarity of thinking and everything we've been talking about is really valuable. So enjoy it, everyone. And yeah, here is the fantastic Myles Downey. Myles, welcome back to the Coach's Journey podcast.
It's a real pleasure. It was fun last time, and I'm sure the same will happen this time.
Yeah, I'd forgotten I said this, but I've just listened back in the last few days. I always do, and we've got somebody on again. I try and listen back to the last time we were on, and I said last time, and then I remembered how true it was, like how enlivening the first time you appeared on the show was. And we know each other a lot better since then, but it's fun to touch back into that energy from last time and in preparation for this. And we're going to bring an extra sense of aliveness to this episode, everybody, because Neil McKinnon is also here. And Neil and I are gonna experiment for the first time with 2 of the host team, double marking one guest, and we have got no idea how that's going to go. So everybody, welcome to the experiment, and welcome, Neil.
Thank you. Delighted to be here and making every effort to not bump into you, Robbie. So it's going to be exciting.
We'll see how that works. It might be like having I don't know. Can't think what the tennis equivalent of this, because we've got Myles here. It's like. Would Nadal and Federer have played well if they'd ended up playing men's doubles together, or would they have just got in each other's way? Because Neil, that's who I'm comparing us to.
I noticed that. That's a high bar right from the off.
Yeah, let's hope it's it's just like when the Murrays played together. That's again pretty high bar, but could be. Neil, should we move it? Yeah, we're already doing the thing, aren't we? Where it's becoming about us and not about Myles. Should we move it in? Should we move this conversation into something to do with the guest?
Yeah, that'd be a good plan. And again, I also listened to the recording that you did with Myles a few years back, and there was something in it around lineage and ripples. And in another recording I listened to, Myles, was your appearance on The Edge of Coaching with George Warren, who
Yeah.
is an ex-colleague of mine. And in that, there was another thing about ripples where I think George shared that he'd been trained by somebody that trained you. And I wanted to acknowledge that I was trained by George. So I was trained by somebody who was trained by somebody or something like that. So the kind of, I guess, one of the things I notice as a coach is often we're not connected to those ripples that we create through the work that we do. And that, so I'm sort of third generation from somebody that you've trained, I guess, at the coaching school. And hopefully that sort of lands in a positive way to hear that sort of feedback.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. The other thing that really jumped out from me, or for me rather, on that recording was your first encounter with Galway's work and the inner game, and a statement that you made about almost feeling like you already knew it when you first read it, and that it resonated so deeply with you. And I similarly had an experience, although it was with the inner game of music rather than the inner game of tennis. My background is as a musician, and really resonating with the concept of self one and self two, and of getting out of our own way. And I wonder if you might say more about that initial experience of the kind of resonance and sense of familiarity with what Galway was talking about.
And I think thank you. I think it also goes to something more profound in a sense, which is that the way that we get kind of engineered in society, that the kind of culture contagion of compliance, that one of the things that we lose is a capacity to trust ourselves. So we look for the right answer. Coaches will often look for tips and tricks and hacks, and there's a huge cost to that, which is that we neglect the resources we already have. Our own capacity to think things through, to imagine how something might be, for instance, our intuition, which we almost completely neglect. So, and it's almost like in that culture of compliance, what it generates is self one. So self one is the human being in a mental state that's driven by fear and doubt. And it wants to know right answers and all of that stuff. And on the other hand, self two is that part of you that responds fluently and easily and in the moment, that has access to all the resources that we're born with and that we develop over time. And clearly with self two is a preferable place to be. It's more joyous, it's more fun and more creative and more productive. One performs to a higher level. So it's that written across our society that is a major problem. And you're seeing it in our business now, where people are trying to do things like we must institute agility. It's like great, because we've killed people with competencies. Imagine working in a large organization and they have 8 competencies. I mean, how would we fit? So yeah, it was kind of touching right into that, which is that I think in a very quiet way, I'd been a kind of a rebel in school. I'd only done enough to kind of pass my exams, and would much prefer to be out hitting a tennis ball or running or whatever else, or music to some degree. And so that was the bit that it resonated with, that actually you can learn from inside, from yourself, and there's huge value in that.
Yeah. And I wondered, so one of the things that fascinates me about your work and about your writing is this capacity to combine performance-based coaching with self-actualization. So, and we may get into later the conversation around the developmental aspects of coaching and the performance-based. And I wonder if, because it's your agreement, I need, if I might read a passage from the early part of your book, which is, of course, a new edition has recently been released, which is part of what brings us together. Could I read a couple of paragraphs that speak to that?
As long as you don't embarrass me.
Well, one hopes not.
Well, also, Myles, it'll be you that's embarrassing you, won't it? Because you put the paragraphs in the book.
Well, we could debate that too.
So a couple of paragraphs. I fundamentally believe that the desired state of the human being is to be fully expressed and uninhibited, without doubt or fear, to be able to perform, learn, and enjoy, a state in which there is access to all the innate resources born to us. I believe that such actualization is seldom, if ever, achieved alone, but made possible in community or with the guidance of another. Someone who has the capacity and courage to hold a different kind of conversation. A conversation that lets the thinking unfold, lets imagination, intuition, and creativity loose, and in so doing allows people to come to their own understanding rather than imposing one's beliefs upon them.
I did write that.
And hearing it back as relates to the journey of the book, what does it bring up for you?
Well, what it brings up mostly is some emotion, because it for me, that is just profoundly true. And that is what inspires me to continue to do what I have done and to teach it. And I like the bit you've said, because it's never actually been said like that before at the beginning, which is that the connecting self-actualization to the performance piece, because we do live in a real world. Well, we're in a world that has commerce and capitalism built into it, and I get paid on the basis of my clients achieving results in that world. So if I can align both of those things, if I can help people express themselves fully in the context of their work, then lots of people are happy.
So love that you pulled those paragraphs out, Neil. I had basically them pulled out as well, because they are fantastic. The question that came out of them for me is this part of them about the power of the conversations, or particular types of conversation, to create that kind of self-actualization, or in fact, like, I think the necessity of somebody else's presence to help that happen. Why is that so important, Myles, do you think?
So one of the things that I think that's different in the book is that it's in 4 parts. The first part is a description of the effective coaching model and approach and what underpins it. And one of the things that I've become clearer and clearer about over the since the last edition, which was in 2014, is that, as somebody said it, we don't have reality. We have maps of reality. So, and we operate on the basis of those maps. And a more sophisticated way of explaining that is that we have constructs, and those constructs are what guide us. And the kind of what's important about that is that the person who I'm working with has their constructs, and that's actually essentially the topic of the coaching conversation, no matter what it might look like on a more superficial level. So what's significantly important is that you are respectful of that, and you help you help them examine their constructs and check out if they're serving them or not. Because the construct is designed to give you some kind of internal way of regulating yourself and rules by which you live, in order to thrive and be successful and survive. So, and what happens is that we often don't let go of our constructs quickly enough, particularly the ones that don't work. So you're dealing with very, very sensitive subject matter, and it's only in a person expressing what that construct is in some way, and the easiest way to do that is to another, that they get to see it for the first time. And that's why summary is so important. And it's an underused tool, I think, in coaching, which is when somebody says something of profundity, to be able to just calmly put that back before them. It really allows them to get that distance, to see their construct, and to see where it's fitting and where it's not fitting, fitting used in the Darwinian sense. Does it work? So you have to be able to. Galway, author of The Inner Game of Tennis, said, awareness is curative. And it's only in speaking something that you, not only in speaking, but it's predominantly in speaking something that you get to raise your awareness.
And so does this, in some ways, it's really lovely. Does this, in some ways, it takes us towards it's really present in the new edition of the book, as it was in the last edition, throughout your work, this idea of the non-directive versus directive coaching is in some ways like it is present there. It's like we need to show them, what we can do is show people their constructs, and that's the job. The job is not really to tell them what to do, right? If the aim is self-actualization. And I guess there's a slight question there, because that's not always what people are there for. Maybe this is where where it gets interesting. I was going to say messy, but really what I mean is interesting. Is there something, that bit of the book that I think, which I think is new, right? The chapter or two about focusing really closely on constructs, and I got really interested in the idea, in the word construing, as I was reading that as well, which I just again, I love it when it's like, oh, that's what that word means. Yeah, of course it does.
And we use misconstrue rather than construe more often than not.
Right. Oh, that's I can't quite. It's because it's like you get new use of that word. I'm not sure I'm going to be thinking about misconstrue for the rest of this call the next time Neil's speaking. Can you maybe speak something to that? Take us into that idea, because I think it's when I was coming back to effective modern coaching, the new edition, and I said last time you were on the show that I read the last edition at a really important time for me, and coming back to it last time we spoke reminded me of how much it's a part of my coaching, and how much summarizing and showing things back to people, for example, is a part of my coaching. One of the things I loved about coming back to this time is that, I've got little children, so I'm hard pressed for time. So I was like, I'm just going to read the new bits, and then found myself lost in the old bits, speech marks, old bits. And it made me just think, I just need to read this whole thing again, because it's so much in it. But a lot of the questions that came up for me were around, that I found coming up for me, were around directive and non-directive coaching, and kind of how we bring the kind of purity of non-directive coaching to the market. So I found that happening for me quite a bit. But I wondered first if you could kind of bring in for us non-directive coaching, why it feels important to you. I mean, you said some stuff to this already, and kind of really solidify that for us before we maybe jump off in other directions.
Well, so the title of the book and the approach is effective coaching, effective modern coaching, effective coaching. And so at one level, I kind of play a little bit of a sales trick by defining what effective is, and therefore saying, well, the only, given how I've described effective, the only way you can coach is a predominantly non-directive method. And some of the definitions of effective are that people own the outcomes, that they take responsibility, that there's learning that goes along with whatever the coaching is. It's not just kind of a transactional thing which somebody ends up doing some stuff, except so there's a set of criteria around that, and that begins to then imply that the person who's being coached, the player, has to do the thinking for themselves. And that obviously has, another outcome, which is that they, in the words we used earlier, self-actualization, agency, all of those good things. But then you add in on top of that. So that's a good enough reason itself. Then you add in on top that what you are doing is you're engaging with somebody's vision of how the world is, their constructs, and that demands respect. So that again implies that you need to adopt a non-directive approach, because it's the evolution of their construing. And the difference between construct and construing is one is a noun, I have a construct, and a construing implies a process that happens over time. So it's in fact more accurate and more aligned with what we're talking about. So those things are really important. But then you get into this bit, which is, and there's a real problem. There's a problem with the quality of coaching out in the world, which we may talk about later. So coaching is not seen with the same delight that it was seen 10, 15 years ago, where, it was, if you were a senior person in business, you were privileged to have a coach. Now those people are not looking for coaches, and the budgets aren't there because coaching hasn't delivered on its promise. And there are many reasons, but one of them is that there's almost kind of there's become a dogma around non-directive. So people think they have to be non-directive all the time, and there are certain institutions that teach that. I used to teach it in this sense that if I forbade people in the first couple of days of a program to do anything but non-directive, to do only the non-directive, then I took away then they really learned the skill, because if I let them be directive, then they'd always gravitate back to that. So we used to play a trick kind of explicitly, which says, for the first 3 days, we're going to get you to the point where you can run a non-directive session on anything, totally. But then we put in the directive piece as well, because just at a simply pragmatic level, I remember going down to coach in Madrid, a guy who was running one of the biggest banks in Europe, and it was so I'd fly in, be picked up at the airport by a chauffeur-driven car. It was all great fun. I felt very important, and go work with. And I thought, imagine having a conversation with him, and he's got a kind of a really big problem that's going to affect the employment of thousands of people, and he hasn't come to us, a way forward, let alone a solution. He has, and I've seen something like this before, or I've got an intelligence and I've got an idea, but because I'm a non-directive coach, I say, well, thank you very much. It's like, I'm off back to the airport. It's like, no, that would be just professionally stupid and irresponsible. So of course you say, I have a thought. Do you want it? And the guy says, yes. And you say, it's this. And he says, oh, thank you. Brilliant. So we can't afford to get fixated, make things become dogmatic. It's about having clarity of intention in the minute. So non-directive, and so anything that occurs as a polarity, a duality, directive, non-directive, you got to do two things. You got to get above it, so rise up a level, but also transcend and include up a level. So you go above that to a place of kind of presence and attentiveness, and from there you choose whether it's appropriate to be directive or non-directive. You clarify what your intent is, but we've kind of slightly shot ourselves in the foot with people who are following the dogma.
Yeah, I love
there we go. That's the first bump. You go.
I was going to summarize for Myles. I just realized. But okay, the thing I want to catch is about proposing, because I think it's just like you've just done a little bit of it there, Myles. I just want to catch this like really quickly. So first of all, I love the sense that we can go too far. And I also really understand why we want to start, when we start training coaches, why we want to do that thing that you just said, because most people come from the system, as we've discussed before, or most people have thought, like, where directive is the right way. In effective modern coaching, in the last edition that I read, whenever I first read it, like not long after it had come out, and in this one, there's this section on proposing, which you just highlighted really briefly there in that story, which is, I've got an idea, do you want it? And actually, like, part of the reason this is really present for me is I've like flunked proposing twice recently. Like, not awfully, but like in one pretty, like, in front of 150 people, I tried to do it and failed. And it was pretty like high energy for me afterwards to kind of both realize that and I guess in the book I was really struck by that, and I did it with a client recently as well, where it's like, I think really the thing I kind of knew the theory, but I wasn't able to emotionally hold it in the moment. So I loved in that part of the book, there's the kind of rules for proposing and the kind of complexity of that. And I wondered, because it feels perhaps particularly important, given what you just said, that actually we might have over-reliance on the dogma of non-directive. And so the kind of gentle and skillful proposing becomes a more important skill at that point. I wondered if you could speak something to that. And yeah, like I said, I'm asking for a friend. I've never had any problems with this myself.
I know, yeah, indeed. I'm thinking from too many places. I'm thinking for the wonderful people who are listening, and thank you for listening. And I'm also just thinking from where I am in my own experience. So I'm going to speak from that place first, and then cycle back to the good listeners. I've noticed that as I grow in confidence. So we mentioned self 1 and self 2 earlier. When I sit down to coach somebody, my first job is to make sure that I'm in self 2, in flow, without fear and doubt, and fully present. And can I always do that? No. But can I make an improvement from the moment I sit down to the moment I take my first breath? Yes. So so I've gotten better at coaching with the passing years. And what the consequence of that is, and having done a lot of it, I often know what people are going to say before they say it. And I often know with somebody what's going to happen at the end of kind of a 9-month or a year's coaching program. Okay, this guy doesn't know it at the moment, but he will not be in this business in a year's time. I can see him going down that, because he's already told me in some way. So my intuition has become, I'm more attuned to. But because of that, I can help. I can almost see how somebody's construct is evolving. And I can come in on the basis of that with great sensitivity. I'd like to think, of course I get it wrong. But most of the people I'm coaching who are working at that level, they know that I make mistakes. That's part of the deal. I don't get it right all the time. And if it goes wrong, we just rewind and we start again. And most people are very happy with that. So I think the message behind that is, yes, proposing is an essential part of the toolkit, because you in your seat will see stuff that the other person simply isn't seeing, simply because you've got a different perspective. And sometimes that will be useful to the other person. So, and to get really good at it takes a number of years. In my case, almost 40. So proposing contains within it kind of some of the thing, which is that it's propose, not impose. So, and that's the first thing. So knowing what your intent is, making an assessment as to whether they will be able to hear what you're saying, making an assessment as to whether they will take responsibility if they take on what you're saying, that it will be, they'll own it, rather than, oh, you told me to do this. No, you've got to, is it possible they would own it? And then the last one is, if I say this, particularly if it's something challenging, is the relationship strong enough to contain it? Because I very often, will say, but you would say that, wouldn't you? Is it a line like that to a client, kind of, and they go kind of, oh shit. and most people kind of say, quite like being held up like that, and sometimes you get it wrong. So it's really important. And my experience is that if we withhold on that stuff, here's the thing: our clients, the coach, the player, often know that we're withholding something, and that's really frustrating. Really frustrating. so that the sense of incompleteness that they're left with is not conducive towards a fully trusting relationship. So yeah, it's a vital part of what we bring to it.
How it all lands for me is it's in service. Another phrase that I took from the book of empower and enable, as opposed to command and control. Like, I hear you introducing all the proposals as essentially as a question, and done so, at least as I experience it, lightly and without forcing it on the other person.
Yeah. And I think that's why the notion of a construct is really important, because it takes you away from any right or wrong stories around this and say, hold on, is it going to help that person evolve their construing? And it's like, that's the question.
Yeah. The other thing you mentioned there in relation to, as I heard it, the play between non-directive and proposing was this concept of transcend and include. And how I experienced that in your book was being introduced with Assagioli and will and love, and this and then moving into personal construct theory. And I noticed this, and I can't remember if you defined it as such, but this kind of triangle, I saw you doing it on the video also, this sense that we can take through coaching and through facilitating people to look at their constructs, to work with what they believe, we can support that practice of taking seemingly binary elements and transcending and including in all sorts of different ways. I wonder what that sparks for you, because I'm really struck by, and I'm sort of forcing your hand here a little, but the cleanliness and level of compelling narrative you've constructed from Assagioli all the way through to Csikszentmihalyi and Galway, and this articulation of consistently transcending and including for better presence, for better capacity performance.
Yeah. Rumor has it that our good friend Einstein said that a problem is never resolved at the level of consciousness at which it was created.
Mm-hmm.
So transcend and include is about moving up from that level of consciousness. So transcend, if you to understand what that means, it usually means that you're going up a level of abstraction. So if you take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you might start at a fairly basic level of subsistence, and then in order to understand what's going on, you move up a level or maybe multiple levels to meaning and purpose, and from there things look different. So that's what transcend means, and it usually means a level of abstraction. Or if I'm coaching somebody and they've got a problem that they need to solve at a fairly pragmatic level about a strategy or tactics, one of the ways you transcend and include, you say, hold on a minute, in terms of your vision, how does this fit? And you've now taken up a level, and they can see something different there. So as you say, it's a quite a sophisticated skill, and incredibly useful, as Einstein points to, in terms of problem solving. But the beauty of the Piero Assagioli, the father of psychosynthesis, a wonderful humanistic discipline that grew up in the early part of the last century, and you can still find many people who are trained in that and be trained in that. And he suggested that there were two human drives that were fundamentally present in us, one of which is, as you said, will, and the other of which is love. And the will is the controlling energy. It's a kind of he described it in those days. I don't think you could do that in these days but he described it as a masculine energy. It's about control, it's about structure, it's about getting things right. And on the other hand, love, a more feminine energy. It's about process rather than structural control. It's about letting things happen, letting things emerge. And obviously both have their place. I learned as a stepfather that I needed to put in some of the will energy and put in some boundaries in place. And that was consequential in huge ways, in which it cleared up an awful lot of nonsense in relationship with my stepdaughter, and allowed us to communicate much more easily. So if the will isn't there, you've got a problem. And if we know if the love is not there, you've got. But you can be overly willful and end up a bully, or you can be overly nurturing and disempower people by taking responsibility away from them. So his notion of love and will correspond with the ideas of non-directive love and directive will. And our society is overly will-driven, which is why we have to fight against it. But you rise above those, and his triangle had love and will on the bottom line, and then at the apex he had presence. And that's just a very useful thing for us coaches to remember. When you're in the heat of it, actually just close your eyes and step out of the conversation for a minute and just check out what's going on in your own head. You might be amazed to find out what you know.
Hi everybody. Just a quick thing before we get back to the show. As part of our commitment to keeping episodes like this free so we can support you and coaches like you, we'd like to ask something of you. Wherever you're listening to this show, please click subscribe or follow for The Coach's Journey. That's a free way of supporting the show and helping us continue to support you and other coaches. Thanks in advance for subscribing or following, and if you want to hear about other ways to support The Coach's Journey, then listen all the way to the end of this episode or visit www.thecoachesjourney.com.
And I wonder, as you've alluded to, you have a significant depth of experience in the coaching arena. And as you have, I imagine, as a practitioner, and I noticed your mention of Sennett's The Craftsman in there as a increasingly master craftsman, to throw a provocative term in there. I wonder how you've continued to transcend and include in terms of skills, presence, capacity, in order that you can, with some degree of foreknowledge, experience people and have a sense of where they might be heading, but also do so whilst fully present with what is at the moment.
I played, if this might be in danger of almost trivializing. I played tennis from the age of about, well, as long as I can remember, but I know I played my first tournament when I was 7 years old, and played competitively and still do. And I became clear that one of the reasons I played tennis was that in that bounded situation with clear rules, I found it easy to express myself. I could let go and I could enjoy. And I found that I had some gifts that were useful in that environment. But the thing, and I wasn't conscious of this until much later in life, that what I got good at was letting go, trusting and letting go, and trusting in my capacity. So I had my first proper suit, Hugo Boss, at 28 years old, and ended up in the offices of McKinsey, the global management consultancy in Dusseldorf. And I remember just being about to knock on the door where I knew there was an engagement team waiting for me. And so these were some of the brightest people on the planet, and I kind of did enough in school, as I said. But so it was like, and I remember saying to myself, if it wasn't for this suit, I couldn't go in here. But actually, the truth was, if it wasn't for an innate faith in my capacity to respond in a bounded situation that had clear outcomes. So I've been hooked on being in flow all of those years, and it's almost that drives my inquiry. So how do you increase that? Because that's once you understand what the rules of coaching are, and then you forget them, and the lights go green and the show starts, and it's a performance art. And I love that of it. So all of the things I do pretty much are about making sure that I'm in the best place when the lights go green.
And if I may, what are those things in your practice at the moment?
Alcohol. Sorry. No, not before 10 in the morning. Well, one, unquestionably, confidence helps. Two, I've had the not unique pleasure, because other people have it too, but I've probably done this more than anybody else. I've demonstrated coaching in front of audiences small and large, probably more, and I mean this, probably more than anybody else on the planet. So I've had more feedback. My practice has been under more scrutiny than almost any other human being, because I fundamentally believe that coaching is a skill set. There's the knowledge I have and the experience I've gained and all that, but essentially it's a set of skills. So because I taught, because I wrote, because I practiced, because I was observed, my core skills are really, really strong. And I'm reminded that the Greek shipping magnate, George Soros, no, that's not his name. What was his name? Aristotle, Onassis, forgive me. He was an extraordinary salesman, ridiculously competent salesman, pulling off things where he went to a meeting with people who he was going to offer to ship their oil, and they'd already decided, and he knew they'd already decided that they were going to say no to him, but he won the day. And this, we're talking multi-million-dollar deals. He used to practice sales skills with his team. Like he's the best in the world, and he's still practicing. So I think those things are. So I have enormous confidence in the core skills. I've increased my ability to be fully present. The biggest thing that in kind of the middle years got in my way was being sometimes in awe of people who I thought were either more intelligent or had more status than I, and that seems to have gone away without I hope becoming in any way arrogant. So I don't buy. I coached the Air Chief Marshal of the RAF many generations ago, and you go in there and you appear in the gate and you're escorted to the main building where he is, and there's an anteroom before the anteroom, and all these people saluting you, and you get to meet the guy, and I challenged him at one point, and he literally, and I can see him doing it, he looked to see how many stripes I had. So it's like, so I've been in some places where people play on status and authority, but I seem to have risen above that. So I think those are, know what you're doing. And I think there is another fundamental thing, which I'm only seeing now. We've moved to Norfolk, and we're in this tiny little village, and it's 800 or so people. And I remember being back in London, where if you were at a certain kind of social class or whatever the word is, you ate in certain places or didn't, or shopped in certain places and certain pubs and certain restaurants, and other people ate in different ones, and you never mixed. The glory about being in a place where is this small, that has an incredible sense of community. There's only one shop and one pub, so everybody's buying the same stuff, and everybody rubs shoulders in the pub. You suddenly realize that you're all the same. So there is something fundamentally important about being able to sit down in front of another person and just appreciate them for being another human doing their best.
Yeah. It's lovely. It's really lovely. I'm going to lead us in a slight gear change. But one of the things I heard in there was, the story about the salesman, still the best in the world, still practicing.
Yeah.
Might come back to this again, because one of the things I love about the new edition of Effective Modern Coaching is it's got enabling genius, that book of yours sprinkled into it in a few different places. And I might come back. I love the little bit at the end about this is just one for people to find if they get the book. Just can skip to the end and find the articulating your unique genius as a coach, and might come back to that. But one of the things I've been thinking about recently, and maybe it speaks to what you were saying about the shine coming off coaching, is we all know, right, that the best in the world are still practicing, right? We know it of the tennis players, we know it of the footballers, we know it of, in so many environments. I mean, sport, we really know it, but there's a story of a salesperson who really knows it. And I do sometimes think it is amazing that the speech marks best in the world in lots of business environments aren't explicitly practicing in the way that they are in elite sport. And especially once you've had, I mean, I imagine that's not true. It's obviously not true of everyone. And not practicing isn't the same as not having coaching, because people could be practicing things and they are in all kinds of ways. But we have this thing, coaching, that we kind of, well, the three of us and most of our listeners have sat opposite people seeing coaching have this incredible effect. And so why is it that the shine has gone off coaching? What are you thinking about that, Myles? That it used to be a privilege for these senior leaders who are obviously, I mean, well, maybe not obviously, maybe this is the problem. Like, one of the things I was going to say, obviously they must be interested in fulfilling the maximum of their potential and increasing their skill in these ways to create better results. That feels obvious, but maybe that's the flaw in the thing. But yeah, maybe speak to this a little bit, Myles. Like, why is that shine gone off? Why isn't this craft of coaching being used always by those people who seek to be the best in the world?
There are two parts to the answer. There's one, if you look at it from kind of within that club of those senior people, and there's the other, which is about what's going on around that club. And what's going in speaking to the people in the club, you sometimes, kind of the C-suite, I've heard this so many times, and the first few times I kind of ignored it, and then I had to stop ignoring it, because I heard words to the effect that, oh yes, I had coaching once 10 years ago, nice chap, not sure what I got from it. And that speaks into the whole thing about the misconstruing of what directive, non-directive coaching is about, and actually just the poor quality of most coaching. 2003, HSBC ran an assessment of about, I think they started with about 150 coaches in the business, and by the time they were about to actually launch the assessment, various directors in the business had said, my coach must be included, and the list had risen to something like 300. So they had a problem. They needed to do something to understand who was in the business. So they ran an exhaustive process that whittled people down at various points. And I had actually coached the person who set it up, the assessment process, aided by David Clutterbuck. And they did a good job, solid job. And they ended up with a group of about, I think it was 12 or 15 of that order. And what I was told at the time was that, they're okay. But in fact, there are only two people that we'll put in front of our senior C-suite executives. Fortunately, I was one of those two. But I said, that's kind of shocking. So it says something about the quality of coaching. I think there's something to be said about how people buy coaching. So when I started, the people that I was speaking to were usually the chief executive or the HR director, about doing some work in their organization. Now you're talking to somebody who maybe doesn't have that kind of world experience, who doesn't perhaps know what it's like to operate at the top level in that business, and maybe hasn't even been trained in coaching. And they're making their assessment as to whether you are a suitable coach for their organization on the basis of what qualifications you've had. And most qualifying training companies don't actually observe you coaching. So it's like at the School of Coaching in the good old days, there were about a list of 20 skills that you had to be seen to perform on at least 3 separate occasions. And there was a flight card. You had to get these things ticked off. It was So we knew that people were leaving with the skills. So there's the buying problem, and then there's the fact that coaching has now become about development rather than about performance. So that immediately devalues it. So that's the kind of one side of it. There's the other side of it, which is more complicated and a more interesting conversation, which is, why don't the people themselves in the club ask for coaching? I mean, yes, they may think that they need to provide an image of being strong and utterly competent, and therefore having a coach is seen to be remedial potentially. So why do you need coaching? I'm reminded of that ad for the hair product that says, "But you don't have dandruff," and the person waves a particular brand of shampoo and said, "No, I don't." Well, that's the answer. I'm strong and confident because I've got coaching. I think there's a sense of entitlement amongst some people at that level as well, that they're in that senior position because they were born to it or whatever, or because they earned it. So of course they don't need to be reliant on anybody else or help anybody else. But it's a tough question because these are elite people running, elite performers, or ostensibly running significant businesses that impact the economy of the country. I think also the scrutiny that people are under, to be fair as well, from the stock market means that there's so much going on and it's moving so fast that there probably isn't as much time as they need to sit and reflect. And there are, of course, exceptions.
Yeah.
It's a long answer in two parts, and I'm actually keen to see what you've picked from it.
Yeah, I mean, loads in there. I'd love to hear what you're getting as well, Neil. I'm really aware that I think about most of this stuff from the outside. Like I'm not certainly in a kind of the city of London. I'm never in the room with those people, so it is a kind of outside perspective. I guess with the leaders I've worked with, even the ones where I think we can look at it and we can say the results of this work were really good. It's the work doesn't always continue. So I think that is a really interesting thing that I think about my business a lot, because my business would run more smoothly if it always did. So I think there is this I wonder if there's what we say, like a less linearity to this kind of work than there would be to a Grand Slam tennis player. But I don't know if that's true. Budget is a thing that's in there.
Yeah.
Like some of it is like prioritization of spending. Now that's really interesting, because if I had got myself, knowing what I know about coaching, if I had got myself into the position that some of my clients are in, I would be negotiating that money, right? It would be a kind of, for me to, but this may be something about my constitution, for me to survive under the pressure that some of my clients work under, I would be insisting on that so that I can maintain some of my sense of presence and well-being whilst also performing at a high level. So I think there's a budget. I mean, I had one CEO last year. I had to call the calendar invite something different, right? Because in his business, it would have been seen. This is what some of my reading, but he pretty much said it. This would have been seen as weakness.
Yeah.
Right. At a time when he could not afford, because of the incredible pressure he was under, to show weakness.
Yeah.
So if we're lying, essentially we're lying about what's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't lying. It was a vaguely acceptable kind of what we called it, training meeting or just meeting. It might have been, but there are these pressures that people are under, even somebody who, values it. So that there's so much in there. I want to kind of pick up, because you touched on really briefly there, performance versus development, which is really strongly in that kind of preface introduction to the new book. But Neil, first of all, I'm curious, this feels like such an interesting, rich topic. What have you picked up from these last few minutes?
I mean, I think from my position as faculty member at the Academy of Executive Coaching, where we do in the training we provide, there is a good amount of observation of coaching skills. And what I notice is frequently people come to training that perhaps have been doing what they've understood to be a version of coaching, and it's been quite directive, and it gives me some read. It's, you know, a relatively small sample size on this quality discussion as relates to what some people might have experienced. Your chap from 10 years ago who said, or rather, I had a coach 10 years ago, nice chap, but not sure what I got from it. That it's my judgment if there are a significant portion of coaches out there telling people what to do, that is immediately more forgettable than coaches who are working in a way that is empowering and enabling. That there's still a lower percentage of people empowering and enabling and taking a primarily non-directive approach, that means many people's experience of coaching, both as a coach, if they haven't had appropriate training, but also as a recipient, as a player or a thinker or a receiver of coaching being done to them when it's the version that they're being told, are perhaps not having a good experience. So that's, I guess, just my take on that. As relates to the industry and business side, I wonder, with the speed at which things are moving, the level of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity, that people are looking for quicker fixes and more certainty, and that perhaps coaching isn't going to give them that. It's not to say it can't, but that it is likely to be a longer, more resource heavy, and I don't necessarily mean expensive, but rather than taking advice from a consultant, the player is going to have to do the majority of the work. That's my wondering. I don't have certainty about it.
It's so funny because, like, I love that perspective, and it feels so true. And I'll tell you two reasons why it feels true. But the first is, like, there's this fantastic book, one of my other favorite episodes. So like I said, when I listened back to me last time Myles was on, it was like, this is one of my favorite episodes, or my favorite at the time. One of my others was with a woman called Jennifer Garvey-Berger, who's a complexity theorist. And one of the things the traps she says we fall into in a complex world is simple stories, essentially. Or there are two, in fact, the trap of simple stories and the trap of control. And, you know, that feels like one to me. It's like, oh yeah, I know what I'll do. This world is an absolute nightmare to be a leader of a big business in.
Yeah.
It's changing so fast. I'm under so much pressure. I know what I'll do. I'll sort it out by getting somebody who can tell me what to do, right? Like, on some level, something that is short-term fix, easy to control. Like, it feels like hitting yourself, right? Like, I don't doubt that everyone's doing it. Like, we're all doing it. I'm sure if I slow down for 5 minutes, I can think of some ways in my life that I'm doing it. But it is such a shame, isn't it? Because the possibility of coaching is actually the supporting someone to increase their capacity to deal with complexity so that they can actually deal with the problem, not pretend they're dealing with it.
Yeah. You bring to mind a conversation I had yesterday in which we put things on the table and it was not clear where the next step is. Fundamentally about the role of the leader in the business, and the impact that has on people around them. So, you know, what exactly do they focus on? And in a very complex world. And we made an agreement at the end that we would speak at the end of the week. That, in other words, this was not the time to try and close this conversation down. And it was, you know, I woke up overnight thinking, did I, because I proposed that, and it was accepted and went down well. But it'll be interesting to see at the end of the week how what time has done to let those thoughts be in somebody's head, and then, yeah.
I have a real wondering, Myles, and I believe that for some of the listeners, it might be a question they're holding around how you approach the business building or business creation aspect of your coaching, and I got some sense that it is relational, and that from some of the things that you've said, that there's not like a kind of online checkout where one might go and buy a package of coaching from Myles, but rather you meet people where they are and have a conversation. But I wonder if you might speak to that as regards how you structure coaching engagements. Whatever there is to say and share.
I'm delighted to, and I just want to track back into the last conversation, because and I think this point needs to be made by one of us, which is that we've not asked those senior people in organizations, large and small, about what they need, and we're kind of making the assumption that they need coaching, and not only that, they need me, and which may, so it'll be fascinating. So I'm trying to make sure that we're not just looking at this from our own goldfish bowl, and the implicit kind of arrogance that might be heard in that, because that's not, I wouldn't want us, because that wouldn't be true to what we're doing. But it's like it will be interesting to understand more about how those people see what support they need, if any. Because I can imagine that a person who is in a very senior role in, say, a large financial institution in the city, and his HR training partner comes in with a list of half a dozen coaches, and he'll look at that list and he said, yeah, but not one of these people has led a large organization. So how they? So they're not understanding what coaching is. Well, fair enough, but I think that's a point that has to be made. I will be honest with our listeners, which is to say that I think in this world it's much more difficult to sell coaching than it was 10 or 15 years ago, because of the impact of COVID and how that drove us all home. Budgets aren't there in the way that they were before, so most organizations are being very careful about what they spend, and what coaches offer is rather difficult to sell through social media. So you can say all the good things you want and get the right kind of descriptors in your titles or whatever else, but it's a really, really difficult job, because the social media and the algorithms have no appreciation of the fact that Myles Downey has been coaching for almost 40 years. Just that's they don't get that, algorithms, bastards. So my model in the past was really very, very simple. I had a reputation. I had a platform called the School of Coaching. I would be invited to conferences, and inevitably at the end of a conference, 2 or 3 people would come up to me and say, could I have a word? And they would be the HR director of whatever, and they'd say, I take it you do coaching? Yeah, so could we have a conversation about that? And that was how I got most of my work. So I got it because people heard me speak, and I think what they heard heard honesty and authenticity and competence, and that was the attractor. That's much more difficult to portray in the world these days. So you do what you can. You make as much noise on the social media as you possibly can, but I kind of have a vision of this, which is a little bit like some kind of a pinball machine, or more accurately, a billiard table, which is that if you got to have the balls clacking against each other. If there's no movement, there's no spark. So you've got to be on the table, and the balls have got to be moving around and bumping into each other. So in our world today, that's much more difficult to do. So up here I'm living now in Norfolk. I've been for 2 years. I'm setting up an event in a local tennis center where I've invited local business people and people in education to come along to a 1.5-day seminar on kind of inner game material, and my second book, Enabling Genius, that material. And it's incredibly difficult to get people there. But the intention is to have people, to bump into people. So I'm trying to find ways of doing that. Obviously, I'm writing. So I think the fundamental finding ways to get to bump into people, offering things of value, like you guys do with the coach's journey, and Robbie with your 12-minute series, the writing. That those are the ways in which people are, can bump into you.
Mm.
But it's a numbers game. It's, if you're a one-man band, that's a lot of books in the post.
Yeah.
And you're doing the posting. Yeah.
Yeah, the connection piece. And once you have that connection, so for example, you're talking to a buyer in an organization, like, what are the things you're going into that conversation with as regards what you tend to offer and how you work?
So my offer now, I mean, it used to be fairly packaged and straightforward, but now is much more tailored. So I'm trying to, and because I'm much more explicitly about performance, I'm tailoring the work I do with that person to achieving the performance goals. So that's what's driving it. And so I'm probably connecting with somebody in an HR role. So I'll say, it kind of typically looks a little bit like this. I probably work with somebody for about 9 months, 10 months. We'll probably meet somewhere between 8 and 10 times. There'll be these other bells and whistles. I'll probably want to meet kind of members of their team. And if they've got a boss, their boss. So I get that external perspective. So I'll be spending a couple of days on site. And it typically costs about this kind of money. So I'll give them some parameters, and then I'll speak with the person. And there are two things going on. There's the kind of the transactional piece, which is about them understanding what I'm offering and them understanding what a program might look like. But I'm there with a very specific intent on my own part, which is to see if I can establish what the job is we're here to do. And that goes back to, I was working many years ago with a psychotherapist, and we were 10 minutes into our hour, and Nan looked at me and she said, that's why you're here today. And she'd had some visceral sense of, why Myles was here today and what the work was that we were to do. And she'd picked it up before I had. So when I sit down with somebody, I'm trying to establish what the work is, what's the job that we two are going to do together. Working with a management consultant a few weeks back, it became clear that the job was to build his practice within that firm, so that he could, and that meant reaching certain revenues, and that will put him in a place of making decisions about the rest of his life. But he had to declare victory. He had to be able to do this within the next year and say, job done. I said, okay, so that, that's why we're here. So I'm looking for that visceral sense of, okay, that's what we're here to do. And once that becomes clear, then everything else tends to fit around that. But there are external performance objectives always. So I understand what the job is. What's that going to look like in real terms? And that then drives the business agenda. And then the question comes, so in order to deliver that business agenda, do you need to learn anything, develop anything, change your behavior in any way? And now you've got a development agenda that makes sense. You see, when you go in just with a development agenda because the organization has declared these to be the competencies, the person on the other side of the desk doesn't give that word at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they're probably there just because they feel they should be role modeling, being coached by so and so, because they understand that across the organization, for sakes of compliance, people need to understand what the competencies are. So they're not, but you shift it around, put the cart behind the horse, understand what the job is, then say, so how do you need to change? Boy, are they interested in the development agenda.
Yeah. And it's what I hear in that is an intrinsically motivated value proposition.
Yeah.
The end goal has, like, you've already got buy-in from the player.
Yeah, and you can only get to that's what this is about. That's what the job is by coaching. So they've already had the experience of being coached, rather than being told something. Well, here's the grow model, or blah 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 blah. Yeah.
To just jump in, you might want to. I know you might want to come back on more of the way the business works, but I just want to catch this. I think it's a thing I've been wondering about, Myles, because you talk so eloquently and powerfully about business performance goals. And maybe that example works. Actually, you've got this consultant. His aim is to drive to a certain amount of revenue. There are times when a performance goal, it is actually, so a very useful thing for me in my work with clients was realizing to be really careful of tying the entirety of the success of our coaching to an external performance goal that is outside the control of two people, right? But an external performance goal is essentially always outside of the control of two people. And I have my way of trying to hold the truth of that, whilst the value of the performance goal and the fact that we can't guarantee that we'll get it no matter what we do. Sometimes I have my way of holding that, but I'm wondering, how do you hold that with a client? In that they could do. So one of the actually just the thing to catch as well is, this made me think of some of the external results that I've had with clients and how exciting and amazing it is when they happen. One of them that I'll never forget, I don't think, was this. We've been working with this woman I worked with her for 2 years, and in the end, she did keep her office department open in a way that she believed it should have been because of the high performing nature of it and all that kind of thing. But if she worked incredibly hard, if the company had decided to close it, she wouldn't have failed. I mean, she would have failed in one respect, but also she would have done everything she could. So I'm just wondering, there's a little more solidity to it, but yeah, what's coming up for you?
Two things. It depends a little bit on the nature of the job. So I've helped people launch 2 private equity firms, separate people, 2 private equity firms, one in London, one in Luxembourg. I helped a guy set up a boutique bank in Madrid, investment bank. I've helped launch a product. I've helped launch businesses. And so some of those are really relatively easy to define. And that's one kind of thing. In another, and the danger is that it begins to give you an escape route, but it's like you're looking for dimensions down which performance can be measured. So it's sales improvement. So you want to so what would be 100% satisfaction will be an increase in sales to this. Okay, great. And then hopefully you exceed that. But it's like if you've got a dimension down which something can be measured like that, then you're not going to lose your reputation as the coach for hitting 90% of those goals. And don't get me wrong, it's not that I'm any less committed, but it's like if I can somehow protect my reputation by not saying no, it's only 100%, and you're not going to pay me unless you get 100%. No. Because there are too many variables outside my control for that to be possible. So I try and establish. So there's a dimension down which this is, we can measure success, and we're shooting for X million turnover, whatever it is. But it's difficult. It's unquestionably difficult. The beauty of sport and coaching in sport is it's win-lose. It's much more ambiguous in the world of business. And kind of the only way that I can kind of keep my head sane around that is by doing my absolute best and to define something that's meaningful, and without becoming obsessive about it. Because the danger is then you get obsessive about it and you start having entire conversations about what the outcomes are from the coaching when you could actually be coaching them. So yeah, and yeah, so clearly it's not a science.
Yeah, was there anything else you wanted to pick up about the way the business works before we kind of shift gear?
And it's important, just as Neil, as you chew on that one, I think it's important to add into that. This doesn't mean that people who do solely development coaching, focused coaching, are bad people. It's a really useful thing to do, and it might be exactly right for you, as the dear listener. That might be, that might be what turns you on. It might be what your background is in and your expertise is in. So I'm saying do it, and do it as well as you can. But I'm saying, on the other hand, the more you can tie it into performance, the more your business will flourish. There's greater integrity in that, because if we're not there to increase performance and productivity in our client businesses, then what the hell are we for? And the more of us that are committed to performance-based coaching, I think the how that will reflect on the profession is worth the fight.
I guess the thing, so Robbie and I have a kind of internal joke that I'm fascinated by the tactical practical, and two things to kind of cover on that. One is I notice, as fantastic a read and packed full of lots of things of depth your book Effective Modern Coaching is, there's also a good amount of the tactical practical, as relates to the very practice of coaching, the many elements around it. And so I suppose, to round out my questions about your approach to the business of having a practice in coaching, I've heard you say it's about getting the billiard balls moving and discussions happening. It's about ensuring that you are in relationship and dialogue with people and connecting. And I wonder if there's any other risk of asking directly for hints, tips, and tricks around coaches that are seeking to actively further build their businesses, that you might glean from your 10 decades or so of practice that have served you well to this point, and may inform what you're going to be doing in the coming months and years.
I'm not sure how satisfactory my answer is going to be. Because some of this is profoundly personal. So at the moment, I'm kind of a sole practitioner, but I'm working hard to shift that round, because I know that I'm better when I'm working in a team. So some people will want to be completely sole practitioners. Some people want to be in some kind of a loose alliance, and some people will want to be, in a kind of semi full-time employment or full-time employment with an organization, a coaching provider, and so understanding that about yourself is important. And I've been in all of those places along the years. And so maybe it's a question of ages and stages, but understanding that. The other place, and Robbie, you mentioned this earlier from the Enabling Genius book. So the Enabling Genius book, in the research that went into it, there were 15 of us doing the research. We were looking at people who had exhibited greatness in one way, shape, or form. And we were trying to find out, was there anything common in the paths they had taken to the point where they were exhibiting greatness? And lots of things emerged that coalesced around the ideas of identity, will, so motivation, mindset, and then learning, but learning in the sense of ongoing improvement, progression, evolution. So there were those four things. And the identity one tracked back into knowing who you are. So if you in my sport, in tennis, which is my laboratory, that's how I test out how I'm, learning what I'm learning, and it's very important. So I in my game, if you look at two key players of the last 10, 20 years, Nadal and Federer, what you find out is that you watch them, they are completely different. Nadal, powerful, almost brutish, hitting with loads of topspin, doesn't make mistakes, wears you down. Nadal, more finesse, looking to hit a winner, lighter on his feet, and so completely different approaches to exactly the same game. And the point there is that they both have a unique individual genius. They both understand who they are on the court. I'm a tennis player and a tennis coach. If I stand on the court to play a competitive match and my coach shows up, I'm in trouble, because my job as a coach is to make them look good. If so, I've got to have a really great understanding of who I am as a competitive tennis player, that unique individual genius, and understand that that's who I am, and the strategies and tactics that flow from that's who I am. So part of who I am has the word cat in it. And what I mean by that is that I'm trying to finish the point as quickly as possible. So that implies very aggressive tactics. Most of my age group want to prolong the rally and make the other person make a mistake. So it's kind of, so it's quite a different. So I have to understand that. I have to practice that. Leaders need to understand who shows up when they show up as a leader. Coaches need to understand who shows up when they show up as a coach. When I say need to, but my point here is that if you have that clarity of understanding, that radiates from you. It also tells you what kind of people you might choose to work with, and what exactly you're offering them. And when you say that, it comes through with authenticity and hits the target. So another part of this is doing your marketing and branding around something that's really, really clear about who you are, your unique individual genius as a coach. And the clarity in that radiates far.
Yeah. One of the things, so I love that part at the end of the new edition of the book there's some questions, listeners, basically, like I can't remember if I said this exactly before when I brought it up. There's some questions for uncovering your unique individual genius. The insight that I've just had now, so there's a really nice bit, Myles, where you talk about, and I think this is right. Is this? I might be slightly getting this off, but there might be a unique individual genius. What I love about your definition of genius in that book, and you bring it into this one as well, is that we might have a genius we can have a genius in any craft or discipline.
Yeah.
Right. So we might have. So I think what you say is, I have my unique individual genius as a coach, but it also pays to understand my genius as a writer and as a tennis player. I just got that it'd be a good practice for coaches to understand their unique individual genius as a coach, of course, but also to understand their unique individual genius as a salesperson.
Boom, boom.
And I think one of the things, one of the real contributions of some of the thinkers about selling coaching, like the guys who wrote The Prosperous Coach, is to turn the sales process into as close to coaching as can, assuming that coaches have a genius as a coach, and therefore make sales as much like that as possible. But actually be really useful to, because I think, and we've had guests on the podcast before, people could listen to, Toku McCree did it really well. He had this metaphor of the monk and the hunter in his sales. So knowing that the hunter is there to go woof at the moment in the sales call, where the hunter is much less present as a coach, is I think really interesting. So I just wanted to kind of
and which one shows up in which environment. So when I'm speaking with an HR person, they may get a bit of the monk, to use that analogy, but I need to have clarity about, this is a commercial conversation about, blah, blah, blah. So the hunter needs to be there too. But when I get to sit in front of the executive or the person being coaching, you need more of the monk.
Yeah. Myles, we want to be really respectful
before you go. I think there's something that I'd really like just to make sure that I land properly with people, or we do, is that the notion of genius is it's a strange word, and there are lots of people who don't like my using it, and sometimes I don't like using it myself because it feels slightly pretentious. But it has a very specific intent, because I was at a conference many years ago in ICF. Global conference in Malmo, and I had done my keynote, and a guy came up to me at the end, and I could see him in the queue of people wanting to speak to me, and I knew this was going to be interesting, and he was spluttering with rage, and he said, you can't say everybody's a genius. So I said, okay, guys. I said, hold on, whoa. So okay, he said a few more words. I said, so do you believe that people have potential? He said, yeah, but yes, of course we do. I'm a coach. People have potential. I said, great. So their potential is capped just short of genius. And his face kind of crumpled, and it was like, he was brilliant, because he said, I have to think about that. And so thank you, my friend, for being that gracious. So the thing about genius and that word is that the way I'm pitching it is that your genius is the embodiment of your potential. So the potential is this abstract thing. It's like, you say people got potential, it just goes over their heads or in one ear and out the other, whichever way you want to think about it. But it doesn't land. You say you've got genius, that lands. And so it's the embodiment of your potential. It's that potential made real, something that you can inhabit and have out there in the world. And I think that's an important way of thinking.
Yeah, thanks for landing that, Myles. I guess my question, just to finish, probably is there anything else that feels important, either that we've touched on briefly that you want to land now, or that we haven't touched on that you want to bring in these last few minutes?
Well, I think one of the themes, and a very strong theme of our conversation, has been about excellence, and I think that's something that kind of drives me. I remember when at the School of Coaching, people used to get really upset because we had agendas for each of the events that we'd run, the training programs or modules. And I'd come in the morning and say, yeah, we're going to do it this way today. And they get really upset because it looked like I was being kind of quixotic and changing my mind last minute. But they didn't understand. I've been thinking about it for 48 hours and probably not slept the night before. So it's like, I think we've been talking to a large degree about excellence. And you introduced, Neil, the idea of the craftsman, Sennett's book on craftsman, about understanding that coaching is a set of skills, and you can attain a level of excellence in the execution of those skills. And I'd like to think that if that was a message that's going out there to you, our listeners, because if that excellence is there, the rest will follow. Practice.
Lovely. Neil, anything you want to say to bring us to a close?
The main thing for me is a gratitude for your writing and for your sharing, Myles, and for taking this time to have the conversation. It's been an absolute gift and a real pleasure. So thank you.
Yeah, completely echo that. It's been a real pleasure to be on this conversation with both of you, and to read the book again. Like I said, it one of the things it did, I loved the new parts, and we didn't get into it so much, but the kind of some of those, I think, new parts about effective coaching, definitions and models, and it's so useful. I'm going to be going back to it just as a way to really deepen and reflect on my coaching, because those principles, after all the work you've done to boil this down and add and subtract from what's in it, it feels really profound and important for excellence. I also love that story about Peter, about catching, is front and center. I've got to say, it's doing it to me again. Like I said this last time I spoke to you, these stories about catching, I've read those stories a bunch of times. You told them last time you were on the show. It still brought a tear to my eye when he says, in the story, after Myles, just listeners, you can go back and listen to the last episode or read the book, but that's after Myles has taught this guy coaching through following interest and non-direction, when he just realizes he's been catching the ball and he's never been able to do it before. It's absolute magic. It just made me think,
yeah,
I've got to get along to a room where Myles is doing that, because I'm not sure I'm brave enough to run the exercise myself. So Myles, thanks so much for all this generosity and this work. And we'll have to have you back on the show again sometime soon.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you both, and thank you to everybody who's still listening.
They'll definitely be here. Cheers, both. Hello, everybody. Robbie here again, and just a few quick things to share with you before you go on to the rest of your day. Thanks for getting all the way to the end of this episode. I'm imagining that means that you think the work that we're doing is important, and we think so too. And that's why I want to tell you about 3 ways to support the coach's journey and help us to continue to support coaches to create thriving businesses and to thrive as they do it. And the first is to become a supporter of the show. So you give a small amount of money every month and help us make more episodes and help those episodes reach more coaches. And in exchange, you'll get various benefits, including being the first to know about future plans, getting the chance to ask questions of upcoming guests, and all that kind of thing. And you can do that at patreon.com/thecoachesjourney. The second way to support the show is to join the Coach's Journey community. And not only does that mean you get to support the show, but you get to be a part of my flexible, affordable group coaching program for coaches. So you pay between £20 and £100 a month, and you get access to a certain number of group coaching calls every year, plus some one-to-one time with me if you're a full member, and various other benefits. And of course, you get the chance to be connected to other amazing coaches on their journeys as well. You can join the community and find out loads more at thecoachesjourney.com/community. And lastly, if neither of those is right for you right now, please click subscribe or follow wherever you're listening to the show. That really makes a difference to us to be able to keep this show free and again reach more coaches. So thank you to you and to everyone who's supported the Coach's Journey over the years, but in particular thank you to Alex Whitten, David Norris, Jessica Jem, Joey Owen, Linda Ransom, Lucy Braun, Ruth Saville and Alex Martinoff for your ongoing support. Thank you too for listening, and we hope to have you back with us on the Coach's Journey podcast sometime soon.